Hello, welcome back to India Today Global. An exciting day today with the vice presidential debate between Minnesota Governor Tim Walz from the Democratic Party and Ohio Senator JD Vance, Donald Trump's running mate. This vice presidential debate, of course, a regular feature of US presidential elections. And today we got to see the two running mates of Kamala Harris and Donald Trump square off, lay out their policy platform, what they want to do. Quite an interesting debate. And frankly, me personally, I thought it was a much meatier, much healthier debate than what we've seen actually through presidential candidates too. But joining me now to discuss this whole debate, what issues were discussed, and what he thought about it was our DC Wala Desi, Rohit Sharma, our Washington DC correspondent. Rohit, take it away. What did you think in terms of the debate, the key issues, and of course, we baited you here by talking to you about who we thought won. So why don't you tell us who you thought won as well?
I think, I think the first half of the debate, I think JD Vance was absolutely killing it.
Right.
I think he came across as somebody who's well prepared. He came across as somebody who knew exactly, his talking points.
Right.
If you go back and check, he did not mention Biden at all in his first few answers.
Right.
He was completely attacking Kamala Harris, to a point where he even said the Harris administration a lot of times.
Absolutely.
So I think JD Vance was doing great. And I think then Walz caught up with him. This reminded me of the debates we used to have prior to 2016.
Right.
You go back to Romney and Obama,
Right.
and you go to Hillary Clinton, sorry, my bad, the 2008 cycle with
Sure.
Obama and McCain. I think very civil. One thing that we heard a lot was I agree. Both the candidates trying to find common ground and commonalities in some of the issues that they discussed. So very heartwarming if you're an American to watch politicians come together and talk about important issues, presenting their own vision.
Absolutely.
Who won the debate? I think by a slightest margin, I think JD Vance did.
Right.
And he again, the two things that you have to do as a on a stage on VP debate is first do no harm to your candidate, and then build up your own self-worth to come across in presidential. And I think Vance was able to do that.
Vance was able to do that. That's very interesting because, something you need to know about Rohit is that he's been in the States for 17 years. He's covered every presidential election since Obama versus McCain back in 2008. Someone who has a real experience seeing how American politics has changed. But I have to concur with Rohit here as well. We were watching the debate together, and I initially also got the sense that JD Vance, for all the social media controversy he's been getting, you might remember that he called people without children childless cat ladies and so on and so forth. He seemed quite vicious and nasty going into the debate, but I think he showed that he was able to switch on a different side of him, come across as very statesman-like, a very composed, calm debate performance, was able to represent his view much better and even empathize with the opposing side. In fact, one moment that I thought what Rohit was mentioning that really illustrated how both candidates were able to work together and at least try to come to a better conversation was when they were talking about gun violence, and Tim Walz, Governor Walz, sort of said that his 17-year-old had been caught in an incident of school violence and shooting, and JD Vance said, look, I didn't know that, I'm so sorry. And it was, and Governor Walz thanked him for it. So it was the kind of moment that we're not exactly used to seeing in American politics.
And I just want to pick your opinion on this. I mean, you've been obviously, doing race for the White House, and you obviously have seen this. What was your initial reaction of seeing American politicians being just cordial? Because we don't see that anymore. It's very polarized in America.
It's funny, right? I think it triggered an old memory in my head, right? Which was that I was very young. I'm tipping my age here a little bit, but I was very, very young when the McCain-Obama debates happened, as well as Obama-Romney, and it was just that became the norm. I think that became the norm that which you judged American politics by. Someone like President Obama, who defined American cool at least for 8 to 9 years. Those were very thoughtful debates against people who are extremely well qualified, where personal jibes were not an extremely important part of the electoral conversation. Like these two people, whatever you say about them, really represented the best forms of the argument for their particular parties. There was serious discussion on childcare tax credits in America. I came away slightly more informed about that, about defense policy in the Middle East, about housing and infrastructure. So there was serious conversation, and I felt that I also liked the personal aspects of the debate. I came away thinking, I think that as Rohit was saying, that look, you have to do no harm to your own candidate, and you have to build yourself up. And I think that on both those counts, actually, I think that both candidates did well on that front. Both candidates landed punches. I felt it was fairly even between the two candidates and how they performed. I also felt that it was not a question of who beat whom, but I felt like both candidates did well for themselves. I think Tim Walz represented the kind of brand that he wanted to represent, being someone who's folksy, Midwestern, a football coach. I think he got across to his audience. And I think JD Vance, shall I say, won slightly more I would say that because he turned a lot of the public narrative around about him because there's a lot of questions about his competency, about the social media controversies he's been able to getting himself into, and he was able to represent himself as really calm, steady, middle of the way candidate. I was really struck when he's talking about abortion in a way that came across to me even as extremely empathetic, and I was impressed by that. So my sense was that Walz won. I felt JD Vance won more, and I think he set himself up well as someone who will want to contend for the Republican presidential nomination in the future.
And joining us right now is a very special a guest from New York. We've got Mr. Vibhuti Jha, who is a Republican leader, a very well-known leader, Indian-American leader from New York. And we would want to obviously talk to you, Mr. Jha, about this debate. You know, what we were talking essentially is, you know, who did well and who did not. What was your sense of the entire debate? I mean, we were discussing before you joined that it was very cordial. It was nice to see politicians, you know, agree on a lot of stuff. Maybe they have different ways how they want to get to the end point. But what was your take? And, you know, as a Republican, you know, just give us what you're able to gather there from New York.
Thank you, Rohitji, for having me here. The wonderful thing was that, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
All right. No, the couple of things that stood out. Normally the vice presidential debate is rather inconsequential, whereas I found that this debate turned out to be far more consequential than the previous two debates that happened between Trump and Biden and Trump and Kamala Harris, in my opinion. Both these guys were remarkably friendly, and they attacked their positions without attacking each other, the person. That was the civility of the debate was very highly maintained. In addition, they did talk about issues very well. Each one had their point of view. So I compliment both the vice presidential candidates for keeping the standard of the debates very high. My take is very simple. That JD Vance scored very well. He scored very well on a couple of counts. Somewhere along the line, Tim himself had to call himself knucklehead for his deception and lies and misstatements. On a couple of issues, he drove home the point very powerfully. The points that he drove home very powerfully were how the Kamala Harris administration, we just heard a few days ago John Kerry talking about that the First Amendment has to be done away with to protect the world from knowing the misinformation. That's at the bottom of hitting at the freedom of speech as the mandate in this country. You know, I just thought that people of Vermont who have the tagline of their state, live free or die, they would have all died today if they heard the Vance attack on the Democratic Party position. We also know now that Zuckerberg admitted to the entire media, to the world around, that he was pressured into succumbing from the Biden administration on many issues that he was supposed to do the right thing. He didn't. So that was another second one, very important. The third one, which was very critical again, was the fact that in the voter identity, Mr. Vance stayed away from controversies by sticking to the truth, which is my favorite thing to do. You always stick to the truth and you always emerge a winner, which is what he did by highlighting the fact that while Tim may be, in agreement with many things, but he's following Kamala Harris, and as such, he could be wrong. And he really brought about one thing very truly, very well, was that he brought Trump as a good man, as a good president, because he laid out the 4 years of his run as a president as the open record. It doesn't generally happen that people compete for a president's position within 2 terms of each other. But in this particular instance, you could not fault Trump for the policies that were remarkably successful. So you look at whether the issue was immigration, you know, he scored very well there, that Kamala Harris had failed totally miserably as the border czar. She didn't even go to the border until last Friday when she showed up there for a photo op. And on the contrary, on one of the channels, when she was asked, why haven't you gone to the border? She says, I haven't gone to Europe either. That is the ridiculous extent to which Kamala Harris is now exposed to, because this is where the JD Vance drove home the point. Whatever you are saying that you will do in your administration, you had 3.5 years to do all of it, and you didn't. What is your escape hatch for that? And the one thing which I think JD Vance missed out on was to attack Governor Tim Walz about his Minnesota record, in which he praised the violence. Oh, it is just a normal thing happening under his tenure. So there were many very significant elements of this debate, which, kept me up and very engaged, because JD Vance emerged as a top-class debater, truth teller. He also called out CBS when they were doing the fact-checking on him. He said, well, you are fact-checking me, I'm doing the fact-check on you. After that, nobody heard the fact-checking again. So here was a person who was totally aware, very awake, and very pointed in his reference to all the questions, because he said he answered all the questions. That's what is critical thing that I emerged from me. And I found Mr. Tim Walz is a respectable governor of the state and has been a congressman. He was taking more notes than I have taken ever in my classes in college. So he was like forced to take notes, and he looked like a, man scared to do the job. Looked like that he could be responsible if he didn't do well for Kamala Harris's defeat. Well, it could be him. And he had that responsibility on his shoulder, that if he fails against JD Vance, Kamala Harris's career may go down the tube. And that may probably have happened.
Mr. Jha, I do have a question. You mentioned about, largely you've said these debates were, the past two debates were inconsequential. Have to ask you this. I mean, do you think this will move the needle towards Trump? I mean, is that your own assessment, that this debate could actually have those independent voters, maybe change their mind towards voting for Trump or for Kamala Harris? I mean, do you think, that's my first question. The other question I really want to ask you is, towards the end of the debate, when Governor Walz asked JD Vance about the election results of 2020, and that's obviously become a big talking point, it was a non-answer. So, I mean, and I just saw, something come out from the Kamala Harris's campaign that says that, that's going to become a big talking point. There will be ads coming out soon, letting the voters know that JD Vance, did not give a straight answer to a simple question. So first, I mean, do you think this is going to move the needle? And then what do you make out of the non-answer that was given by JD Vance on the election results of 2020, with Trump rejecting those results?
Excellent, thank you. First of all, the question about, I will answer the question about the 2020 result. Let's put that first out of the way. He did say that he handed over the power to the next administration. The power transition did not have any problem. He did not go and did not leave the White House. He handed over the power and it went on. He contested the outcome based on his beliefs. Now, in your belief, you could be right or wrong. Only evidence would say otherwise. So I think he answered the question perfectly all right, because he said that the matter is over insofar as they are concerned, because there is a new administration in place anyway. That was I think it didn't matter. It didn't matter. It was a question in hypothecation, because it is already over, past. That's why he said, let's move to the future. The other part is whether it moved the needle. I think it did. That's why I said right in my opening statement that normally these vice presidential debates are inconsequential. It is kind of what we call in Hindi, naam ke vaste. But in this particular season, it is important because of the simple fact that the presidential debates have been much less than what was anticipated. By now, we ought to have had 2 more debates, but both Kamala Harris and Trump have kind of withdrawn from the entire argument, because the Democratic Party played games with the debates as well. And they were insisting on their choice, but they will never come on any channel that Republican Party talks about. So there was a reason why Republican Party is hesitant, and there is a reason why Kamala Harris is also hesitant to do the debate, because she's not a debater. She was trying to score brownie points. In the absence of the presidential debates, this became important. Also for the reason that in the case of Mr. Trump, Mr. Vance had to appear presidential because this man could take the office. He is literally a breath away because Mr. Trump has had 2 attacks on his life, and also the fact that he is 78, 79 plus, heading towards 80. So Mr. Trump himself had said that he will select the vice presidential candidate who can step into my shoe right from the word go. That's where JD Vance showed up as the presidential material. People will have no hesitation in saying that, okay, if something happens to Trump, we have JD Vance as the next step-in guy because he's good. He proved to be good. You can't say the same thing about Tim Walz.
Interesting.
And that's what is my assessment of the whole thing.
What do you think, Shashank?
Yeah. No, actually, could I ask you this? Actually, you hinted towards what you thought about Tim Walz's performance. It's strange asking a Republican to judge a Democrat's performance. But could I ask you how you thought the Minnesota governor did? Your personal assessment as someone who's on the other side of the aisle.
Yes, I have a personal assessment. And listen, I'll tell you something. I may be a Republican. I am a Republican, not maybe. But these issues I deal on a very dispassionate way, primarily because I put myself in the situation of those candidates. And you will be surprised to know the way I address these debates is my son is always with me. We watch the debates. And he and I say that, but what would we have said? What would we have done? And my son is a Democrat, okay? And he said, Dad, your guy creamed my guy today. So what happened was that it was his opinion, a Democrat's opinion, that JD Vance was very impressive. He proved his credentials, and Walz failed. He looked rattled. He looked nervous. And he was looking copious as a student, frightened on the stage, trying to take notes, jaldi jaldi mein kind of thing, So this is where I would say the assessment is that Mr. Walz is a governor. All politicians are smart politicians. It's your moment on the stage that matters. In that moment, how did you perform? Whether you miss the penalty, apply the soccer language, whether you miss the penalty or you scored, that mattered. And I think Tim Walz failed in that assessment.
Okay, Mr. Jaz, thank you so much for joining us. I think a lot of people agree with the fact that JD Vance did really well, and he looked presidential, and he could very well become a president in a lifetime. So thank you so much. I know it's getting late over there in New York. We'll come back to you for more, such important issues and points as we cover race for the White House. Thank you so much, and have a very good night.
Thank you very much, and have a wonderful day, both of you guys. I didn't quite get your name.
I'm Shashank Mattu.
Sushant?
Mattu.
Mattu. Okay. Sushant Mattu.
I'll have Rohit.
I have a very good friend here, Dr. Mattu, who I know very well.
Well,
the entire Mattu family.
Well, fantastic. So we'll keep getting to you with that, and Rohit, I'm sure we'll make the introductions. So thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So,
thank you. God bless.
Thank you. And in a moment, I think we'll also be joined by a Democratic Indian American leader, Mr. Yogi Chuk. But that's what everybody's saying.
Right.
Like JD Vance did well. Obviously, I could understand Vibhuti Jha is a Republican, so we'll probably talk more about that stuff. But I think even Walz did not have a bad night. Especially came in his own towards the end, or probably middle of the debate.
I think he was good. I think on particular issues where he was talking about, how he had owned a gun and has been someone who, has been out shooting, has been a hunter. He talked about his experience, as a teacher. He talked about his work in Congress, and the parts where he was talking about, I'm a governor, I've done this. Whether it was on healthcare or housing or so on and so forth. I think he came across as a solid candidate. I don't think he did anything to enhance his standing already, unlike JD Vance. I think when you look at it in comparison, what did both candidates want to do? I think Rohit framed it perfectly, right? Don't do harm to your own presidential candidate. And I don't think either of them did any harm to their candidates, and enhance your own personal standing. I think Walz kept him, hit his notes. He did have a lot of notes, and he wasn't smiling as such or whatever. That's certainly true. In terms of body language, JD Vance did seem more relaxed. But I also have to say that while Walz did not necessarily do anything to enhance his own personal standing, JD Vance turned things around for himself in terms of the public narrative. Democrats, I mean, you look at Twitter today, a lot of Democrats are saying that, look, we may not like JD Vance, but he put up a very, very respectable performance, very, very cool and calm. And in fact, I mean, this may be controversial to say, but Rohit and I was just saying that on the question of abortion, I want to go back to that. If we could play the clip, I would love to play it for you. But, he didn't go fire and brimstone. He wasn't an extremist on that issue. He was very clear that, look, I know women who have had abortions who felt like if they did not, they would ruin their lives. And I appreciate, and I think as the Republican Party, we have to win people's trust back on abortion. That is a very empathetic answer.
Very. And I think, I also felt like during the debate, there were times when Tim Walz could have attacked more.
Yeah.
I think he was, again, whatever debate preparation was done, I know Pete Buttigieg helped him.
Right.
That will be talked about a lot. But I think there were so many opportunities that Walz could have attacked Vance, and he did not in the way that you would see him. Now, again, we've seen a lot of debates, and we've seen, this is obviously cordial and all that stuff. But I think if you're in the Kamala Harris campaign right now, you probably are having those conversations about, why didn't you go after this? Why didn't you talk about more about the Vance about abortion, him flip-flopping about Trump, the Haitian immigrant thing. I mean, he did not go all attack on Vance. And I think from Kamala Harris's campaign, they probably would have wanted him to do that. Now, it's also personality, I think, issue, personality trait, whatever you want to call it. This Walz came across as this older gentleman who wants to, bring people together and work and all that. But I think from a campaign strategy, with only 30-some days left, if he could have done that like he did towards the last answer in the 2020 election, that gives a lot of ammunition to the campaign to be able to make ads, and talk about it and have include those responses in the stump speeches. And we obviously didn't do that. So I think very important. And the other aspect, that we obviously want to talk about is economy. That's a important factor, especially when it comes to swing states. What was your take on when the guys talked about
actually, I thought it was interesting. I think that one of JD Vance's best moments on the debate was when he was talking about how in fact, I think we've got our second guest as well. But just very quickly.
No, we have time.
We've got a little time? Oh, perfect. So, what I felt about JD Vance on the economy was one of his best moments was when he said that, look, Tim, I understand that you have a very difficult job. You have to explain why Trump did so well in the economy, and now you also have to defend. So you have to explain that, and you also have to defend why your administration has been doing so badly on the economy, which, the economy is, of course, the main issue with inflation and price rises and so on and so forth. So I thought he hit his notes well on that. He was certainly strong on it. Walz also tried to defend that, but, now having covered this and thinking back on it, this is very important, right? What do you remember once the debate is done? Right? And what I remember is JD Vance's answer. I'm struggling a little bit to remember what Tim Walz's answer was on questions of the economy. I know he said something about Trump when the day they came into the office. This was during COVID. There was massive devastation. There was a manufacturing recession. One thing, about attack that I think that he could have done much more, Tim Walz, on the economy, is that he could have pointed out that one of the big legacies of the Biden administration has been that they've been willing to spend tens of billions of dollars to bring foreign companies back into the United States to manufacture. In fact, there was a statistic that there's been a 300% rise in manufacturing investment into America in the Biden administration. He did not push on that in a way that I think would have been very good to push on.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing that was talked about economy, and I think it's why it's very important, is inflation. And I think Vance was really good when he talked about inflation. I mean, yes, Walz had a difficult job. He does have a difficult job to do to defend economy right now. But I think Vance actually won that. From my perspective, I think he absolutely won that.
And on immigration, what did you think?
Immigration is a very interesting one. Again, I think I would have expected Walz, to get maybe get more attacked by Vance, but he did not. He was, because again, at the same, objectively, you look at Republicans and you associate them with Project 2025, the humanitarian crisis, having camps, deporting people, stopping asylum, and that's not polling well with voters. You look at Democrats and you talk about how there has been the increase in number of people crossing the border illegally. These immigrants becoming a burden on the system. I think both of them did not really want to talk about it because, it was more like, to me, it appeared like they just wanted to just talk about it on the surface and just leave for the audiences to figure it out.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, again, I think it was the first time, I think, that Project 20, no, actually it was during abortion with Project 2025 was mentioned. Again, surprised that Walz did not bring up Project 2025 during...
Too much. He didn't bring it up too much.
Yes.
I think that the funny thing is, but on the immigration, I do have to say that Tim Walz had a decent answer to begin with, which is very clearly, just for our viewers again, that there has been a massive border immigration crisis over the last couple of years on the southern border of the United States. A lot of Central American countries, we're talking about Honduras, El Salvador, and so on have had major political instability, and people are fleeing those countries and are going through Mexico into the southern border of the United States. Hundreds of thousands of such cases, and this has become a major political issue. Now, what Tim Walz and the Democrats have said, because this has happened on their watch, they've said that, look, we put together a bill for President Biden to sign, and Donald Trump went to say to Republicans and said, no, I don't want you to sign this bill because I want this to remain a live issue in the campaign. If you sign this bill and the border issue goes away, what do? I can't run on anything. So he basically sabotaged an effort. That was the Democrats are alleging this, that hey, this was an effort by the Republican Party to sabotage something that was in the national interest for their own personal political gain. I think Tim Walz was very strong on that, but then I felt like he sort of got wishy-washy talking about, oh, why are you demonizing people, which I don't think people really want to hear. I think people are very clear that they don't want illegal migrants.
You know, I think that's a very excellent point that you talk about, Shashank. You know, there definitely was this bill in the summer.
Right.
Again, came too late in the administration. The Biden and Harris administration, as they call them now, waited for 3.5 years to bring this bill. Supported by both the parties. People wanted to vote for it. Border Patrol endorsed the bill, which is a big deal. They want more Border Patrol on the border. But then Trump calling members of Congress and saying, do not pass this bill. And I think Walz was actually able to use that. We've seen Kamala Harris talk about it as well. But then again, I think on, and what we've seen from polling is on immigration especially, I think a lot of people agree with, deporting these illegal immigrants. I think at one point during the debate, the moderator said that CBS did a polling and more than 50% of Americans agree with that talking point, which is what Trump and JD Vance has been using. So I think both sides had it. They could probably use this issue to motivate some of these independent voters.
Absolutely,
but again, very important topic. Again, not saying too many attacks there. We're trying to get Mr. Yogi Chuk to join us. But before that, I think we'll talk about gun violence. I think that was an interesting topic too.
That was a great topic. I would love to say something on this because I feel like that was one of the key issues on which I felt Tim Walz had a reasonably good answer where he talked about how, and I think one of the more human moments in the debate. I wish we had the clip for you.
We do actually now.
Oh, we have the clip.
We have a clip on gun violence that we wanted to play for. So we'll come back and talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. But let's see if we can manage to get that clip for you and play it. We're just working with our team here to figure out if we can get a few because I felt like that was such a
school that feels unsafe or where there are visible signs of security. But I unfortunately think that we have to increase security in our schools. We have to make the doors lock better. We have to make the doors stronger. We've got to make the windows stronger. And of course, we've got to increase school resource officers because the idea that we can magically wave a wand and take guns out of the hands of bad guys, it just doesn't fit with recent experience.
Well, I think all the parents watching tonight, this is your biggest nightmare. Look, I got a 17-year-old, and he witnessed a shooting at a community center playing volleyball. Those things don't leave you. And look, I'm a hunter. I own firearms. The vice president is. We understand that the Second Amendment is there, but our first responsibility is to our kids to figure this out.
Tim, first of all, I didn't know that your 17-year-old witnessed a shooting. And I'm sorry about that, and I hope that he's doing okay. Christ have mercy. It is awful.
As you were saying, a very human.
I like that. That stuck with me throughout the debate. There are moments that stick with you. I think this was a good moment. I felt like I have to say that on this one, I felt like Tim Walz stuck the answer better. Where I think he's strongest when he talks about his personal experiences, his family. He's had a varied and interesting background in a way that JD Vance also does. He talked about it less. He talked about the issues of the economy, but I think he was very good on this. Where he said, "Look, I'm a hunter." I remember he talked about how I used to be an NRA guy. I used to be someone who used to love guns and go out shooting. He still is. But he said that, I sat down with I was sitting down with the parents of people who were killed in the Sandy Hook 2015 massacre where lots of young children were killed. And he's like, I had a picture of my 7-year-old and their 7-year-olds are dead. Right? Yeah. He was extremely good on that. That was a moment that stuck. Like I said, JD Vance on the economy, but Tim Walz sometimes on these personal moments, I really felt like he stuck that answer. And it was good to see both sides talk about it, but I felt like Tim Walz stuck that answer really, really well.
And now we have joining us with us is Yogi. Yogi, thank you so much for doing this for us. Importantly, we've been talking about this for some time. We had a Republican guest as well. What was your takeaway from this debate? A lot of people saying JD Vance outperformed Walz. What have you been able to come up with trying to decode this for us as to who won this debate and what were some of the talking points that the voters will take away from this?
Sure. If this debate was who's going to be the debater in chief, Vance would have won. But if you look at the conversation about each side making a case for why they believe the vision of America that the voters need to vote for, I think Governor Walz held his ground. Clearly, the conversation was about the key issues that seemed to be at the forefront: immigration. It was about the economy. It was about healthcare. It was about abortion. And at the end of the day, this whole conversation, I think, is going to do very little to change. But one has to be honest and candid that Vance did a good job. He came across as not being weird. He came across as being substantive. And I think the key takeaway is that everybody was expecting that this was going to be a knucklehead brawl. It actually ended up being a little bit more cordial, substantive, and substance. It was a substantive conversation.
Return to the old American politics, Yogi. When people would shake hands, we saw that moment when the spouses were able to go and greet and each other, shaking hands and trying to have a conversation post debate. We really haven't seen that since 2016. So is America going back to becoming normal again?
No, far from it. The vice presidential debate, they had one goal, and that one goal was to come across as do no harm.
Yeah.
I think no harm was done. I think clearly Vance did have an advantage. He came across as being substantive. Certainly, having come from Yale, he certainly has articulated the ability to converse in a way. On the ability on debating points, I think Vance outperformed. I think he did struggle in a couple of the issues where he had to defend Trump, but for the most part, he was able to respond to the questions. He did fact check as well. Walz was a little homely. Comes from the Midwest, and from that regard came across as a teacher and a coach. He did struggle a little bit objectively, but I didn't think he did any harm. He made some very good points, at least on two observations that I think he won the debate on, which was abortion, of women's freedom to choose. And then I think in the last question, he did stump Vance when he asked him that, would you say that Trump lost the election? I think that was probably not Vance's most finest moment.
Yogi, this is my and Shashank, both of our assessment. I think we were talking about how Walz did not capitalize on some of the things. He did not attack JD Vance on some of these things. Do you think that's going to hurt the campaign?
I don't think it will. See, as I see this election, the Republican base and the Democratic base is squarely in the court of their candidates.
Right.
Regrettably, this election is going to come down to battleground states, and it's going to come down to the 200 independents. It is still unclear, I think, that, coming...
Lost the audio.
I think slight technical issue.
Yeah, we just lost Yogi's audio for a second there. But as I think Yogi was saying, this wasn't, if this was a debater-in-chief competition, Vance would have won.
But I have to say that, look, I am not convinced that this is, again, I think as Yogi was trying to get into, I think that, the bases of both particular political parties have been mobilized. They're very clear about who they're going to vote for. This is really a toss-up between undecided voters. I really do have to say that, look, there have been vice presidential debates in the past where one guy has completely knocked out the other guy. I go back, this is ancient history, but 1988, when Dan Quayle went up against Lloyd Bentsen, there's this famous exchange, which, of course, to an Indian audience will be hard to explain, but it was, let's just say that it was a debate in which the senior elder statesman absolutely knocked the lights out of a younger politician. But the Republicans went on to win that election, right? Despite the fact that their vice presidential candidate had done badly, they went on to win that election because ultimately it's about the two people who are at the top of the ticket. My sense is that this is going to get 12 to 24 hours of play and then everyone moves on to other things. This has been an election where something like the assassination of Donald Trump, which dominated the assassination attempt, on Donald Trump
twice,
which dominated the news cycle so much the first time around, was within 2-3 weeks forgotten. Because then Joe Biden dropped out, Kamala Harris came in, and then no one was talking about it, right? So something like a vice presidential debate, I think, is a blip in that radar. I think, like I said, the big takeaways are, I think that JD Vance was able to show to a large section of the Republican base that, hey, look, I can be a very different kind of politician. I can be.
I think we've got Yogi back with us. Yogi, can you hear us now?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can. So you were completing your point. So why don't you go ahead and talk, finish what you were saying, and then we have more follow-ups on that for you.
Right. I really believe that vice presidential debates absolutely don't carry that much weight. And to Shashank's point, when Lloyd Bentsen came back and made the comment and said, I knew Ronald Reagan, you know Ronald Reagan, I think that was a knockout moment. But here, at this moment in time, I think the vice presidential debate was very important to the point about where is the future of this country. I think there is still a tremendous amount of uncertainty. If you watch the polls in the battleground states, you're noticing that every single day, whether you look at the polls, there seems to be a fundamental shift. So something is definitely going on. I would say that to the point that Shashank just made, that this will be lost in the 24, 48 hours. I think it's going to carry on a little bit longer. The comparison point will be made as to Kamala Harris and why she has. So there's a tremendous amount of attention that I think is going to be paid on her segment for the 60 minutes. I also think that the next 2 to 3 days is going to be a very defining moment for how this election pans out because of what's happening with Iran and Israel right now as well. So this debate will linger on, but what will happen is that a vice presidential candidate is a heartbeat away from the presidency. What is the merit that they bring to the table? Independents will look for that. They're going to come back and say, do they reflect the values that I'm looking for? What Vance did was interesting. He continued to talk about issues that he felt were important from why a Trump presidency should be given a shot again, considering the things he talked about in regards to the pre-COVID economy. He also talked about communication and the danger to America from Walz's side.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. We're going to see what it is, but I'll tell you, I still believe that Governor Walz did not perform badly. He made his points very clear. If you talk to the Democrats, they're going to say, you know what, he was awesome. If you talk to the Republicans, they're going to say Vance was awesome. If you talk about the networks, they're all going to come back and say Vance outperformed.
Yeah.
Marginal difference at best. I think this election is still a cliffhanger. Still unclear who will be elected. I think the next week,
do you think this
the outcome of the war is going to have a determination.
Do you think, Yogi, this is going to move the needle? And I asked the same question to another gentleman who joined us, Mr. Vibhuti Jha, who obviously you know of him from New York. And I asked him the same question. Do you think this is going to move the needle, especially when it comes to battleground states and those independent voters that's been quoted forever by both the campaigns? Do you think people will make up their mind to be like, all right, we probably see Vance as somebody who's more presidential versus Walz, as you said, one heartbeat away from presidency? You think independent voters will make up their mind after this debate?
No, I think what they're going to look back is they're going to come back and see how Vance described President Trump and the man that he knows, how his own thinking about Trump the man and how it's evolved and how he believes that the economic policies underneath the president were fundamentally good. But on the other hand, if you look at Walz, what he showed us that the Democratic Party is singularly focused on its message. There is really no difference between the message of President Kamala Harris's campaign and his vice presidency. There's a very clear line drawn in the sand that abortion is a critical right to choose. And then on the question about the economy, he really did talk about the difference between the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. They did come back and talk about the fact that a burgeoning middle class will only happen under a Democratic administration. And I think from that regard, Vance and Trump had a goal to show that they were on the same thinking. When Vance was forced to differentiate himself on the question about whether President Trump lost the last election or not, he did pivot. And he did talk about the fact that I want to talk about the future.
Yeah.
And at the same time, he talked about the fact that the electors should have been seated. So not the best answer.
Yeah.
But I think it will thread the needle a little bit. I think the independents will probably look at this and say, okay, which party and the trifecta of a vice presidential and a Democratic candidate who I think is going to be better for this country. So barely, but not significant enough.
Okay, before I let you go, Shashank, any questions for Yogi?
No, I don't. In fact, and thank you so much, sir, for your views and for joining us and for explaining how you thought the debate went. I think we've got like two very interesting perspectives, one from a Democrat, one from a Republican. Thank you so much, sir, for your time. Rohit, just to close off, they did closing statements for the debate participants. Your closing statement on who you thought, what the big takeaways were?
I think a couple of them. First, as I think both the candidates were able to use their talking points.
Yeah.
Clearly, in my opinion, JD Vance won this. JD Vance being just a 40-year-old, I think he has a bright future in the Republican Party. We'll probably see him run for office. That's like guaranteed after watching him do what he did today. I think with all Democrats appreciating the way he was able to talk about issues in a way that a more center politician would do.
Right.
So I think that's one. The other thing is I think race is still tied. Maybe barely there'll be any people who will make up their mind after watching this debate. But one interesting aspect is, I think, and we've been doing this for such a long time, Race for the White House at India Today Global, is the issues have been consistently immigration, abortion, and gun, and economy, inflation. And I think people have not really been able, both the camps, I should say, have not been able to present their ideas clearly.
Right.
And this was a missed opportunity, I think, for both of them. So I think that's one of the big takes away. Personally for me, I probably would wanted to make up watch this debate to see what are the campaigns saying, and if the next person in line cannot do that, then I think it's a big problem.
Right. And to close, if I may take the last word from Rohit,
sure.
allow me. I had two takeaways. The first one was, I think Rohit again framed it brilliantly, and I will come back to that framing. You're supposed to do really two things, right? Which is do no harm, as Mr. Yogi was saying, to your own presidential candidate. Because remember, these guys are not the main show.
Yep.
The main show is Kamala Harris versus Donald Trump. So do no harm to your major candidate. Both people succeeded. Show that you can actually do the job of the presidency. And I felt like both men were able to show that, look, Tim Walz in a different way talking about how he's been Minnesota governor, he gave across that sense that, look, I have run a state for a while, I know how to do government. And JD Vance coming across as someone who's like, look, I'm intelligent enough to get across to the issue. So both people are able to show that ultimately, if anything happens to the person at the top of the ticket, I can step in and do the job of being president. That's important for a vice president. So both of them did that. The third thing, which is where I think that JD Vance clearly took it away, was he was able to change the public perception and substantially enhance his own personal standing, which Tim Walz did not really do, but he still has a good public reputation, so that's fine, works for him as well. Even he has a substantially enhanced national profile because of this. That was one thing. That was one takeaway. Second takeaway was just following up what I said about JD Vance. Rohit and I were talking about this before, which is that, look, JD Vance has had this transformation from being someone who is a major Trump critic, someone who wanted to take the Republican Party in a very, very different direction, someone who wants to be more of a centrist and less extreme on social positions like gay rights and abortion. He used to be that kind of politician. Of course, what you see in recent years is that he's become much more aggressive on culture war issues, oftentimes unlikable. He turned that around, and on specific issues like abortion, which stuck with me, he spoke in a way that I felt had real empathy, which is something that you don't normally associate with Republican politicians. He channeled something there.
In the recent times.
Yeah, in recent times,
in
right?
Recent times.
And I think he channeled something there in that one answer that I felt that is a part of his personality. It's a part he may have bartered away with to get on the Republican ticket and to succeed politically. But I wonder, as Rohit was wondering, whether he may in fact have a future in American politics. I wonder whether he's still finding his political brand if he chooses to. I think he can make an attractive centrist candidate if the Republican Party moves in that direction at that point in time. But of course, for now, he is Donald Trump's running mate. He will have to take extreme positions on particular issues. But those are my takeaways. And Rohit, with your permission then, I think that we can, of course, close down then this conversation that we've had, Rohit and I talking about the issues, as well as having one Indian American politician from New York, Vibhuti Jha, as well as Yogi, a Democratic friend, explaining to us the big takeaways from the vice presidential debate between Tim Walz,
the last
one and only
in this election cycle in 2024.
So now it's a full sprint in the last month of the selection cycle. But please do stay on India Today Global. We will continue to cover this. Of course, we've got Rohit with us for a while, but of course he's also going to be extremely busy bringing you the latest insight. Remember, 17 years of experience covering US elections, and of course I'll also be there covering US politics as well. Thank you so much for watching India Today Global.